Good evening and welcome to World Today. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. This is your one-stop destination to track all major international developments. India's flagship conference on geopolitics, Raisina Dialogue, kickstarts with focus on the pandemic and India's role in health solutions globally. And even as India has decided to fast-track approval to more foreign vaccines to boost the fight against the pandemic. In other news, UK adds Pakistan to the list of terror financing nations. New Zealand approves legislation to monitor the impact on climate change. All that and more. First, the top stories. Amid rising cases of COVID-19, Centre decides to fast-track emergency approval for foreign vaccines in India. Decision taken to widen the basket of vaccines in the country. Russian vaccine Sputnik gets approval. Prime Minister Narendra Modi to virtually inaugurate 6th edition of Raisina Dialogue this evening. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar stresses on South-South cooperation, humanitarian assistance, disaster resistance during curtain raiser of the Raisina Dialogue 2021 in New Delhi. United Kingdom adds Pakistan to list of 21 high-risk nations with unsatisfactory money laundering and terror financing controls. The list of 21 countries released by the UK government replicates those countries listed by the Financial Action Task Force as high-risk or under increased monitoring. New Zealand becomes the first country to introduce law that will require banks, insurers, investment managers to report impact of climate change on their businesses. And in sports, India's Bhuvneshwar Kumar wins ICC Men's Player of the Month for March 2021 for his impressive performances in recently concluded series against England. Let's now begin with the big news of the show. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will virtually inaugurate the 6th edition of the prestigious Raisina Dialogue today. The theme of the Dialogue 2021 is Viral World, Outbreaks, Outliers and Out of Control. The 2021 edition will have 50 sessions with participation of some 150 speakers across 50 countries and multilateral organizations. Over 2,000 attendees have pre-registered from across 80 countries, and a large number of participants are likely to join the dialogue through various social media platforms as well. Raisina Dialogue is India's flagship conference on geopolitics and geoeconomics, held annually since 2016. In the past 6 years, Raisina Dialogue has grown in stature and profile to emerge as a leading global conference on international affairs. It attracts leading minds from global strategic and policy-making community to discuss broader foreign policy and strategic issues facing the world. And External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar stressed on South-South cooperation, humanitarian assistance, disaster resistance during the curtain raiser of the 6th Raisina Dialogue 2021 in New Delhi.
Humanitarian assistance, whether it was an earthquake in Nepal or a civil war in Yemen or a cyclone in Mozambique or a typhoon in Fiji or a mudslide in Sri Lanka, or whether it is, taking the Paris agenda forward through, initiatives like the International Solar Alliance, or, how to respond collectively towards disaster resilience. So there are very practical ways by which we have demonstrated our belief in the world as a family. And
External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar met with Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs of France, Jean-Yves Le Drian. The delegation-level talks between the two countries are underway on bilateral, regional and international issues of mutual interest. The French Foreign Minister is on a 3-day visit to India. Le Drian's visit will pave way for further strengthening of partnership across trade, defense, climate change, migration and mobility, education and health sectors in the post-COVID context. And let's now talk in detail about the significance of the Raisina dialogue that is going to be inaugurated by Prime Minister later in the evening today. The opening session, the curtain raiser, took place earlier today. Dr. Harshvardhan Pant of Observer Research Foundation, Distinguished Fellow, is joining us. Remember, ORF is also the organization that hosts a Raisina dialogue along with Government of India. Professor Pant, a warm welcome. Good evening. Looking at the curtain raiser conversation that Dr. S. Jaishankar was having, we see that the focus of this edition of Raisina Dialogue is quite naturally the pandemic challenge that the globe is facing, but also how India is at the center of global health solutions for it.
Yes, what has happened is that COVID-19 has made us all aware of some of the fundamental challenges facing global order much more vividly. We were talking about some of those challenges before, but suddenly now what COVID-19 has done, the pandemic has done over the last year, is to make us aware of the underlying shifts. And one of the major shifts has been how the global health architecture is actually not at all prepared to meet the kind of global health challenges that we are facing. And it just so happened that India, because of its strengths in this particular sector, has been able to emerge as the global leader in this landscape. So therefore, a lot of the conversations that are happening around health these days, global health, global public health these days, tend to involve India and tend to see India as a very responsible global player that has not only taken the lead in terms of providing, whether it was PPE kits earlier, medicines earlier, and now vaccines, but also shaped the global agenda. Prime Minister Modi from the very beginning saying that this global health crisis can only be resolved if countries come together. He took the lead in calling for a number of these platforms, whether it was SAARC leaders, whether it was G20 and others. And so I think India has framed this debate in a way where India has emerged as a global leader in this respect, and therefore a part of the Raisina dialogue conversations will be focused on what India brings to the table in this particular sector apart from others.
Right. And Professor Pant, in a very nuanced intervention, Dr. S. Jaishankar also spoke about how, on the one hand, India has emerged as a leader in providing relief and providing support during the time of the pandemic, but it also talks about, and he questions, in fact, the manner in which the international community has come together to tackle the pandemic. He hinted towards the production facility in India also, perhaps that requires greater support from international members to make sure that our response to COVID pandemic together is a better one. But those are some nuanced interventions, important points for the international community to look at, if it's doing its part for the pandemic.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that is the essential question. India can certainly do so much. And India is, is a relatively, a weak country in its capacities if you compare it to some of the developed countries in the world, around the world. But what we saw, was a sense of nationalism, going to an extent of vaccine nationalism and medicine nationalism, if it can be called that, emanating from major world capitals, which has been quite counterproductive to the larger spirit of global health and global pandemic that we are facing. So the challenge is, how can the world do its bit in helping India do its bit? So it's also a conversation about the world community coming together and helping India. We have seen some steps being taken. For example, the recent Quad initiative.
Yes.
It talked about how Americans and the Japanese perhaps can provide some funding. Australians can help logistically in manufacturing and distribution of vaccines from India. So clearly there is a recognition of India's role, but I think the international community will have to step up and do much more if the challenge is to be met at the global level, because we are still facing this unique situation where most of the vaccines have been hoarded in some ways by the developed world. So there is a large part of the world where the access to vaccines is very, very limited, in fact negligible. And you can't really manage this pandemic without this being a global campaign.
Right, and it is difficult to also separate vaccine diplomacy from geopolitics that Raisina Dialogue is looking at. We talk about equitable access to the vaccine, but the foreign minister also speaks about whether we have true equity in globalization, if it has indeed benefited each partner country equally. So there are these larger questions also brought into the conversation while the focus is on the pandemic.
Yes, I think one of the most important aspects this year is going to be how COVID-19 has made us more aware
Yes.
of the inequalities that pervade around the world insofar as global economic order is concerned. After all, what we were talking about in terms of vaccine and inequitous distribution of those vaccines is a reflection of the larger global economic inequalities. And so the geopolitics and the geoeconomics of the world will have to be taken into account, and it have to be remedied in some ways, because unless we are willing to take these issues head on, which COVID-19 actually gives us an opportunity. These are very trying times, but it also provides us an opportunity to shape these conversations in a direction where the kind of economic globalization, the kind of inequalities that pervade within societies, within nations, across nations, if we are not able to tackle them now, then not only we will not be able to tackle the COVID-19 effectively, but also we will not be able to provide a template to the global order, which it so fervently needs in this time of great distress. So I think that's what the conversations are going to be about, and that's what the larger sort of trajectory of the discussion at Rising a Dialogue.
Right, and in the conversations that have happened so far, we see there have been conversations about India's rise, but also in a manner that is helping other developed countries also meet their true potential, a term that some of us may be unfamiliar with, South-South cooperation. If you look at the global map, we see the developing countries in the southern part of the globe coming together to sort of meet their true potential. On that front, in that context, Professor Pant, India's role is again being talked about.
Yes, because India is one of the few countries that can actually talk to these countries as an equal. We have had a history of working with countries in the developing world. India still is a developing country with some of the similar challenges that it faces across the world with other countries in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, where the development considerations are still very similar. And so we understand the problem. India may be a country that is on the rise. India may be a country that is doing well economically, but the challenges it faces and the history that it has had in terms of working, in terms of in terms of engaging with the South countries in the South, gives India a very unique voice in global governance and global discourse. And that is very important, because not many countries have that leverage, have that means of communication with the rest of the world, especially with the developing world. So as India looks to take its role as a global player, where it will be deciding some of the most critical issues around the world in global governance, India is also cognizant of the fact that a large part of the world is perhaps outside the frame of these conversations.
Right.
And it is important for the world to bring those countries into these conversations if we are to tackle effectively the challenges of the
Right. It's interesting how while India has emerged as a leading development partner for a lot of economies in our neighborhood and elsewhere in Africa as well, the External Affairs Minister in his intervention also talks about if the international community has truly acknowledged India's rise and India's role. He gives an interesting example of 400, 800. He talks about financial inclusion program that India had undertaken. It's spoken about the kind of relief that India has provided during the pandemic. But is the global media, is the global diplomatic community looking at India's role and acknowledging it fully that India deserves?
No, I think there is still much to be done. There is still much to acknowledge. There is still much to recognize. That India, with all its challenges, with all its problems, remains a very, very internationalist in its orientation at a time when major countries in the world, major powers in the world, rich countries in the world like Western European countries or America or even China, they have tended to be protectionist in their orientation. India is one of the few countries which has been talking openly about the need for greater for free and open global economic order, that rules need to be followed, that multilateralism needs to be more open, and that India's role in that needs to be acknowledged much more openly. And I think that goes back to the question that I think Prime Minister Modi asked the UN General Assembly when he addressed it. And he said, India will not wait forever to get a seat at the UN Security Council. Indians are tired of this debate. And I think at some point this debate needs to be resolved, because it's ultimately the question of the credibility of UN Security Council itself. So I think it's ultimately a question of how far the world platforms, the world organizations, the member states in those organizations are willing to acknowledge what India has been doing. And it is also a question of whether India will be taken on board as a player that is doing much more than many other countries, is doing much more than perhaps its capabilities allow it to do, but it is always willing to share with the wider international community, both in terms of challenges and opportunities, and it's willing to share its resources with the developing world in particular, so that the idea that India, the world is one community, is actually operationalized. It's not simply a matter of rhetoric.
Right, and Professor Pant, to make that point clearly and to sort of tell the India story more clearly and comprehensively to the world, how significant do you see also this platform, Raisina Dialogue, where into the 6th edition, the manner in which the Indo-Pacific perspective is being articulated in the changing global order? How significant do you think this platform has become over the years, Raisina Dialogue?
Well, I think the story of the Raisina Dialogue speaks for itself. In a very short span of time, it has become perhaps the most important geopolitical platform, not only in India, but in the larger Asian landscape. And worldwide, the number of countries that participate, the senior level participation that you see, and how seriously it is taken by the global community, both in terms of state level actors, as well as non-state actors, as well as those in the civil society, academia, think tanks, public policy space. All of them want to be part of this, all of them want to engage with it, and all of them try to learn from it. And the way it has shaped the conversations. Indo-Pacific today is very well recognized across the world. But remember, Raisina Dialogue was the first platform where the 4 nations which are included in the Indo-Pacific, their naval officers, their naval leaders shared a platform. At one point, it became very controversial, but they did share a platform, and then it became almost well-accepted terminology today. So clearly, in terms of shaping the discourse, shaping the normative framework of India's rise, and also making a point to the rest of the world that India is not simply doing its bit, but also wants to engage with others in making sure that it's a partnership which involves both India and the rest of the world, as India takes its rightful place in the community of nations, and as the rest of the world looks to India for leadership. So I think that is what Raisina Dialogue as a platform has intended to do, and it has been relatively successful in conveying that message across the world. If you just go by the numbers, if you just go by the stature, if you just go by the list of the speakers and the list of participants who vie to attend this venerable platform.
Right, and Professor Pant, rule-based international order is a phrase that we've been hearing quite often in the recent months and years. It's also one of the key agenda of Raisina Dialogue to engage on that theme. What do you think are the possible tangible takeaways that could emerge when global leaders converge on this theme, on this platform in particular?
This is the Raisina Dialogue is an intellectual platform where you can have honest and open debates and discussions about both the opportunities as well as the challenges that the world order faces. And I think in that respect, when you have a global community of nations coming together and working with each other and coming on a similar platform with an open mindset, there is no set agenda. This is a platform that gives space to alternative views, that allows people to express those divergent views and to come to a modus vivendi in terms of their understanding. You see that you would see greater progress perhaps in the kind of discourse that we want, in the kind of global governance architecture that we want to create, and the kind of rules-based global order, rules-based multilateralism that we want to imbibe in the global order or imprint in the global order. And I think that is what, if the platform is able to do that, it would be a success, in particular at a time when COVID-19, as I said at the very beginning, is forcing us to look at some of the more fundamental realities of the fragmentation of the global order, the rise of great power rivalry, looking at the world in a way where polarization of politics is a reality, and where the issues of inclusion, whether it is gender, whether it is various kinds of actors, and whether it is the kind of environment that we want to live in, broadly imbibed. So I think by and large, the agenda is very wide and broad, but I think it calls for a participation of a range of stakeholders which can come together and articulate a role both for India and for global governance at a time of great distress. And therefore, this platform this year in particular assumes even greater significance.
And Professor Pant, later in the evening when Prime Minister Narendra Modi delivers his inaugural address, it will be also interesting the manner in which he articulates India's role in the changing world order, because that seems to be the greater theme that this conference, this dialogue is looking at.
Yes, and I think Prime Minister Modi has been very, very keen on this platform from the very beginning. If you see, he has always participated in person, in every single iteration of this conference, and that shows that he's aware of the need for India to shape the narrative, of the need for India to be part of the larger, wider world and discuss and debate things with the wider world. So that the issues of global governance, global order can be tackled in a more humane way. And I think his own articulation of India's role in the world has been quite significant.
Yes.
He has articulated India's role in the world through multiple platforms. And when he articulates this today also, I think the world will be watching very carefully to see what kind of a role he envisions for India, again at a time when COVID-19 has changed some of the fundamental assumptions of the world order.
Right there, Professor Pant. Thanks very much for joining us in World Today and sharing your perspective. Thank you. And moving on, the centre has decided to fast-track emergency approvals for foreign-produced COVID-19 vaccines that have been granted emergency use authorization in other countries. Now, this is to increase the number of vaccines available for domestic use and also expedite the pace and coverage of vaccinations. The matter of augmenting the basket of vaccines available for fighting the pandemic, as well as to accelerate the pace and coverage of domestic vaccination program, it was discussed in the 23rd meeting of the National Expert Group on Vaccine Administration for COVID-19. This was held on 11th of April, chaired by Dr. V.K. Paul, member Health, Niti Aayog. The institution, after comprehensive deliberation, recommended that vaccines for COVID-19 that have been developed are being manufactured in foreign countries and that have been granted emergency approval for restricted use may be granted emergency use approval in India. The first 100 beneficiaries of such foreign vaccinations will be assessed for a period of 7 days for safety outcomes before it is rolled out for further immunization program within the country.
बाहर के जो विदेश में बने हुए वैक्सीन हैं, अगर उनको यूएस के रेगुलेटर ने, यूके के रेगुलेटर ने, ईयू के रेगुलेटर ने और जापान के रेगुलेटर ने अप्रूव किया है या डब्ल्यूएचओ की इमरजेंसी यूज ऑथराइजेशन लिस्ट में इंक्लूड हो गया है, then that or those vaccines are approved for use in India. A prior precondition of a clinical trial will not be applicable, and this is a provision for COVID-19 vaccines only under the special circumstances of the day of the pandemic related urgency that is prevailing in the country.
The government of India has intensified its fight against COVID-19. Sputnik Vaccine, developed by Gamaleya Institute in Russia, has been granted emergency use authorization for restricted use by India's national regulator. Now, it is the third vaccine that has been approved by Drugs Controller General of India after Covaxin and Covishield. This is set to fasten the pace of COVID-19 vaccination drive in India. Now, today is the day 3 of countrywide Tika Utsav or Vaccine Festival. Day 2 of the 4-day Tika Utsav saw many workplace vaccination centres operational across the country. Over 40 lakh vaccine doses were administered just yesterday. Yesterday, 71,000 COVID vaccination centres were operational, marking a significant rise of an average 26,000 operational vaccination centres. The cumulative number of COVID-19 vaccine doses administered in the country so far stands at 10.85 crore. In terms of the number of daily doses administered globally, India continues to remain at the top with the average of around 40.55 lakh doses administered per day. Now, Union Health Ministry has made it clear that there is no shortage of corona vaccine in the country.
राज्यों के पास जो उपलब्धता है, unutilized doses available with the states and union territories, उसकी संख्या 1,67,20,000 से अधिक है. So that means that today, as we talk to you, 1,67,20,000 plus doses are available with states and UTs for administration. इस माह में यानी अभी से लेकर अप्रैल माह के अंत तक जो सप्लाई राज्य सरकारों को और संघ शासित क्षेत्रों को प्राप्त होगी वो 2,01,22,960 डोजेस की है. तो इससे ये स्पष्ट होता है कि समस्या बेहतर प्लानिंग की है, समस्या डोजेस के अभाव की नहीं है.
Let's now take a look at the COVID-19 update from across the country. As per the Union Health Ministry, 97,168 recoveries were recorded in the last 24 hours, taking the cumulative total of recovered patients from COVID to 1,22,53,697. Now with this, the recovery rate currently stands at 89.51%. India's total active COVID caseload stands at over 12.64 lakh today. The country's present active caseload comprises 9.24% of the total positive cases. The fatality rate stands at 1.25%. And let's also track the updates on COVID-19 front from across the globe. More than 13 crore 72 lakh people worldwide have so far tested positive for COVID-19, while over 11 crore people have also recovered from the infection. The deadly virus has so far claimed over 29,58,000 lives globally. United States continues to be the worst affected country by the COVID-19 pandemic. So far, more than 3 crore 19 lakh people have tested positive for COVID in the US. And more than 5,76,000 people have died of COVID in the United States. The Director General of World Health Organization on Monday said that confusion and complacency in addressing COVID-19 means the pandemic is a long way from over, but it can be brought under control in months with proven public health measures. WHO DG also said very few people are taking precautions, and it appears that some have been taking the approach that if they're relatively young, it doesn't matter if they get COVID infection.
We too want to see societies and economies reopening and travel and trade resuming. But right now, intensive care units in many countries are overflowing and people are dying. And it is totally avoidable. This disease is not flu. Young, healthy people have died. And we still don't fully understand the long-term consequences of infection for those who survive. This pandemic is a long way from over, but we have many reasons for optimism.
Meanwhile, WHO team leader on COVID-19 said the pandemic is growing exponentially with a 9% increase in cases last week, the 7th consecutive week of increases and a 5% rise in casualties.
We are in a critical point of the pandemic right now. The trajectory of this pandemic is growing. In the 7th week in a row, we've had more than 4.4 million new cases reported in the last week. If you compare that to a year ago, we had about 500,000 cases being reported per week. Last week, we had 4.4 million cases. If you look on our website and you actually look at the epi curve and the trajectory of the pandemic right now, it is growing exponentially. This is not the situation we want to be in 16 months into a pandemic where we have proven control measures.
Australia said that a second case has been diagnosed with a blood clot after receiving the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccination. However, it added that there had been no rise in inoculation cancellations as authorities tried to steady a bungled immunization campaign. This week, Australia abandoned the goal of vaccinating all of its nearly 26 million population by year-end after Europe's drug regulator reported rare cases of blood clots among some adult recipients of AstraZeneca doses, suggesting a link. Africa must expand vaccine manufacturing to combat COVID-19 pandemic and future health emergencies, continental leaders and international health officials said on Monday. The continent has struggled to acquire coronavirus vaccines and imports majority of its medicines and medical equipment, leaving it at the mercy of overseas supplies. The World Trade Organization Director General said it was morally unconscionable and a serious economic hit that just 1.1 per 100 Africans have received a vaccine, while in North America the rate was over 40 per 100 people.
Between a steeper fall and a weaker rebound, Africa will have lost ground to other regions, particularly Asia. So to boost growth, trade, and livelihoods, we need to get vaccines to everyone who needs them. And with the lowest rate of vaccine delivery, 1.1 doses per 100 people. In North America, the figure is over 40. This is morally unconscionable and a serious economic hit.
And speaking at the conference, World Health Organization chief said that WHO supports calls for manufacturers to remove obstacles hindering access to critical health products.
WHO joins countries around the world that are calling on vaccine manufacturers to remove obstacles that are preventing access to critical health products. We continue to call on companies to share know-how, intellectual property, and data with other qualified vaccine manufacturers, including in low and middle-income countries.
Let's also now scan through other news and developments from across the world.
Taiwan has unveiled a new well-armed amphibious warfare ship that can be used to land troops. It will bolster supply lines to vulnerable offshore islands in the South China Sea. The 10,600-ton Yushan, named after Taiwan's tallest mountain, is the latest part of President Tsai Ing-wen's ambitious program to modernize the armed forces in the face of unrelenting pressure from China, which claims the island as its own. The South Korean government has expressed strong regret over Japanese government's decision to release contaminated water from the Fukushima nuclear station into the sea. Japan will release more than 1 million tons of contaminated water from the destroyed Fukushima nuclear station into the sea. Japan's move has been opposed by neighbors including South Korea and its own fishing industry. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte reappeared in public after an absence of nearly 2 weeks. The president's non-appearance had fueled concerns about his health that the government insists are unfounded. The Philippines is battling one of the worst coronavirus outbreaks in Asia, with hospitals in capital Manila overwhelmed amid record daily infections, while authorities face delays in delivery of COVID-19 vaccines. Guillermo Lasso, who unexpectedly won Ecuador's presidency, has again vowed to revitalize the country's economy. He won on the promise to revive an economy battered by coronavirus. Lasso, a banker, took 52% of the vote in the runoff following a campaign that pitted his free market economics against economist Andres Oroz's pledges of a return to socialist largesse. Lasso's victory was likely helped by a ballot-spoiling campaign that left 1 in 6 ballots void. Former American film producer Harvey Weinstein has been indicted in California on charges of sexual assault. The 69-year-old producer appeared before New York court proceedings on whether to extradite him. California's criminal case against Weinstein covers alleged attacks on 5 women from 2004 to 2013 in Los Angeles. Afghans marked the onset of Ramadan with fasting on the first day of the holy month. People thronged to markets in Kabul buying food for special treats of iftar. Certain foods and drinks associated with Ramadan are consumed much more during the holy month. The festival has come while there is an upsurge in violence in the country. World Today Desk, DD India.
Let's now look at some stories from a more intimate world around us, stories that inspire, stories beyond headlines.
"12 black and white Magellanic penguins have been returned to the chilly seas of the Atlantic coast of Argentina after they were rescued and rehabilitated from health issues including malnutrition and anemia. It was a sight to behold as the boot-high penguins waddled down a windswept sandy beach after being released by conservationists. Many wanted to capture the scene for photos with onlookers before taking the plunge back into the sea and swimming off to freedom. In London, people returned to the British capital's main shopping street as England began easing lockdown restrictions. As evening fell, shoppers on the famed Oxford Street were treated to the first of its kind large-scale digital art installation that lit up a three-story shop front. Titled Constellations, the artwork by LA-based British-born light sculptor Anthony James features 33 million LED light bulbs installed over 36 digital canvases covering the exterior of the Flannel's flagship store. As many as 200 Dutch tourists arrived on the Greek island of Rhodes on Monday to trade lockdown in the Netherlands for 8 days of voluntary confinement in a Greek holiday resort, as part of a test to see if safe holidays can be arranged during the COVID-19 pandemic. For €399 each, participants will have all-inclusive access to the pool, restaurants and other facilities inside the hotel. However, they won't have access to the beach. At the hotel, guests will have to keep a distance of at least 5 feet from one another. They also face several coronavirus tests before, during and after their trip and will have to quarantine for at least 5 days upon return. Despite the restrictions, demand for the trip was high, with around 25,000 people signing up in the hope of getting a ticket. Does having school at the beach sound like a dream? After a year of remote learning and socially distanced classrooms, one school in the Spanish region of Murcia is doing just that, trying to combine clear air and a new way of teaching. Outside the Felix Rodriguez de la Fuente school, mask-wearing children sit before a portable blackboard at rows of green desks neatly spaced out on the sandy shores of Playa de los Nietos, or Grandchildren's Beach. Children at the school are aged from 3 to 12 and remain in their class bubbles. There have been no reported cases of coronavirus so far. In the Vietnamese village Hon Thien, a street has been converted into an open-air art gallery. Sometimes called the Mural Street, it features 40 large-scale 3D paintings. The walls that were thought to have deteriorated have transformed into canvases that feature beautiful 3D murals. In addition to impressing travelers, it has also led to the creation of a new name for the place, Mural Village. A teacher from Vietnam's An Giang province has been able to turn simple black and white rocks that were originally used in construction into works of art that feature the local identity and his love for his homeland. The rocks are pounded, sorted, washed, and dried before being used for painting. Devotees of the late Prince Philip, dressed in traditional clothing, held a mourning ceremony in the prince's honor on Monday on the island of Tanna in Vanuatu. Villagers held photographs of the late prince and spoke of opening the road for his spirit to grow. The veneration of Philip stemmed from a local legend of the pale-skinned son of a local mountain god who ventured across the seas to look for a rich and powerful woman to marry. A total of 500 drones lit up the sky in the shape of a rocket launch in Russia's Veliki Novgorod on Monday to mark the 60th anniversary of Yuri Gagarin's historic space flight. Gagarin became the first human in outer space on April 12, 1961, in one of Soviet Union's most important Cold War victories and a pivotal moment in its space race with the United States. The town's residents admired the swarm drone display illuminating the skies, with the devices lined up in synchronized light displays, forming a rocket, satellite, and an orbital ship. As Russia celebrates the 60th anniversary of Yuri Gagarin in space, a panda at the Moscow Zoo had his own cosmic experience. Rui, the panda, had his chance to lift off on a bamboo rocket made specially for him by zoo workers. The bear-sized rocket, which took several days to construct, held Rui's attention only momentarily before the large panda decided to leave space exploration for another day and instead chose to nibble on some bamboo. Some of the world's best freestyle skiers and snowboarders gathered in Crans-Montana, Switzerland last week to show off their skills at the Audinines. The event, which took place from April 7th to 10th, had a snow park especially designed to allow the athletes to be more creative than normal and attempt various tricks and jumps. The 4-day competition culminated with a rapid-fire train as all the 44 athletes featured in a flurry of simultaneous action.
You're watching World Today. Let's now scan through some sporting developments. The International Cricket Council today announced winners of ICC Players of the Month awards for March that recognize and celebrate the best performances from both male and female cricketers from across all forms of international cricket throughout the year. India's Bhuvneshwar Kumar won the ICC Men's Player of the Month for March 2021 for his impressive performance in India's recently concluded series against England. He was the standout bowler on either side in the white ball series and was chosen the winner for the month by fans and the ICC Voting Academy. South Africa's Eliza Lee, who played 4 ODIs against India, where she scored a century and 2 half-centuries to move to the top of the ICC Women's ODI batting rankings, was named the ICC Women's Player of the Month for March 2021. Sanju Samson's sensational 100 on his captaincy debut went in vain as younger pacer Arshdeep Singh held his nerve in the final over to help Punjab Kings pull off a thrilling 4-run win over Rajasthan Royals in the high-scoring IPL game in Mumbai yesterday. KL Rahul, who made 91 of 50 balls, and Deepak Hooda, who made 64 of 28, barred Punjab Kings to an imposing 221 for 6 after being put into bat. Samson almost took Royals home with a breathtaking 119 of 63 balls, but was caught off the game's final ball with left-arm pacer Arshdeep defending 13 runs in the last over. Chelsea will be aiming to cruise through the UEFA Champions League semi-finals when they take on FC Porto tonight in Spain. Like the first leg, the second leg will also play out at the same stadium in Seville due to travel restrictions owing to the COVID pandemic. Chelsea, having been the away team last time out, will be the host this time and walk into the game with a crucial 2-0 advantage, courtesy of goals from Mason Mount and Ben Chilwell. Paris Saint-Germain hosts Bayern Munich and UEFA Champions League quarter-final second leg tonight. PSG are bracing themselves for yet another defensive job ahead as they welcome Bayern Munich. It is the second leg affair with the hosts leading 3-2 on the aggregate. It essentially means the League One giants only need to hold on to a draw to secure a berth in the semi-final for the second time in a row in this coveted competition. The Indian men's hockey team dropped 1 place to 5th in the FIH World Rankings despite its 2 wins against Olympic champions Argentina in the Pro League matches. India registered a comprehensive 3-0 win against Argentina on Sunday in Buenos Aires in the second match of the FIH Pro League. The Manpreet Singh-led side had also won the first match in a penalty shootout on Saturday, but the Indian team moved down a rung from the 4th spot occupied in January rankings, though it accumulated more points. Reigning world and European champions Belgium sit at the summit. Opener Aiden Marakram struck a brisky half-century as South Africa defeated Pakistan by 6 wickets in second T20 international at the Wanderers. Now, with this win, the host also levelled the 4-game 2020 international series. Pakistan elected to bat, but some poor stroke play saw them restricted to 140 for 9 in their 20 overs. South Africa never looked troubled in their reply as they reached their target with 36 balls left in a comprehensive win. Now, in some entertainment stories, Siberia activists dressed as Star Wars characters cleaned up the Gagarin Boulevard on Monday to mark the 60th anniversary of the first human spaceflight. The activists dressed up as the famous space saga characters to match the date of Cosmonauts Day. Godzilla vs. Kong roared at the US box office top spot, taking $13.4 million in its second weekend of release. The legendary and Warner Bros. Release grossed some $32.2 million in the opening week, despite limited capacity in theaters due to COVID restrictions. The makers of the much-anticipated series Powerpuff Girls have unveiled its first official look. The makers have cast Chloe Bennett as Blossom, Dev Cameron as Bubbles, and Yana Perrault as Buttercup. The series is bringing the famous Powerpuff Toon series to life. After announcing the much-awaited sequel of extremely popular sitcom Friends, the makers have now decided to include some original props in the upcoming reunion special. The props include the famous water fountain and the original set. British actor Sally Phillips, known for her role in all three Bridget Jones movies, is all set to play the lead in her next Australian comedy drama, How to Please a Woman. Phillips will play a 50-year-old businesswoman in the film. The Metropolitan Museum of Art has announced a two-part exhibition celebrating American fashion, kicking off its opening with the annual Met Gala on September 13th. Part 1 of the show will open on September 18th, while Part 2 will open on May 5th next year. And time now to switch on the time machine and understand the importance of this day in history of the day.
On 13th April 1932, the German government banned the Nazi paramilitary groups SS or Schutzstaffel and SA or Sturmabteilung. It was on this day in the year 1935 an airline service from London to Australia was launched. Imperial Airways and Qantas commenced the 20,526 kilometers London to Brisbane route for passengers for a single fare of £195. On this day in the year 1941, Russia and Japan signed a 5-year pact of neutrality in World War II. The impact of this agreement was long-reaching in its effect on the nations directly involved to make war, as well as on other nations, as the second global war of the 20th century engulfed the world. In the year 1945, on the 13th of April, Vienna, the first foreign capital to be occupied by Adolf Hitler, was liberated by Soviet troops. During the World War II, Soviet Union occupied and annexed a number of countries. On 13th April 1951, former Prime Minister of British Guyana, Cheddi Jagan, was jailed for 6 months. He had won the 1953 election, but the governor dismissed him because of his communist policies. It was on 13th April 1960 the United States launched Navy Transit 1B into orbit by a Thor-able star rocket from Cape Canaveral. The Navy Transit 1B was the world's first satellite navigation system. On this day in 1964, Sidney Poitier became the first black actor to win an Oscar. Poitier bagged this award for the best actor for his film Lilies of the Field. It was on this day in 1966 the then president of Iraq, Abdul Salam Arif, was killed in a helicopter crash. Arif was the second president of Iraq from 1963 until his death in 1966. In the year 1970, on this day, oxygen tank number 2 aboard Apollo 13 exploded. The explosion had put the crew in great danger and caused major damage to the spacecraft while en route to the moon. It was on this day in the year 1997, golfing sensation Tiger Woods won the US Masters. At the age of 21, Woods became the youngest player ever to win the title. In the year 2006, on this day, the Scottish-born novelist Muriel Spark died in Italy. He was 88. Muriel Spark is best known for his novel The Prime of Miss Rob Brody.
And in an important development, New Zealand has become the first country in the world to introduce a legislation that will require banks, insurers, investment managers to report the impact of climate change on their businesses. All banks with total assets of more than $1 billion New Zealand dollars, insurers with more than $1 billion assets, and all equity and debt insurers listed on country's stock exchange will have to make disclosures. New Zealand government has introduced several policies to lower emissions during its second term, including promising to make its public sector carbon neutral by the year 2025 and buy only zero emissions public transport buses from the middle of this decade. United Kingdom has added Pakistan to a list of 21 high-risk countries with unsatisfactory money laundering and terror financing controls. The list of 21 countries released by the UK government replicates those countries listed by the Financial Action Task Force as high risk or under increased monitoring. Now, these nations pose a threat because of the weak tax controls, lack of check and balance on terrorism financing and money laundering. The list has been released as part of post-Brexit developments. Until the end of the Brexit transition period, the list of high-risk countries was determined by the European Union under the 4th Anti-Money Laundering Directive. The UK now has its own standalone list, with Pakistan featuring on it. Reacting to the development, Pakistan Foreign Office spokesperson Zahid Hafiz Chowdhury said that UK's decision to include Pakistan in the list of money laundering and terrorist financing high-risk countries was not based on facts. Chowdhury expressed hope that UK would review its regulations. And that's all we had for you in this edition of World Today. News and updates continue after a short break. Namaskar.